Dear audience, I think I don't need to introduce Maksym Butkevych, but I still want to say some words about his work before he joined Ukrainian armed forces, because I think it's important for all of us to understand Maksym's work. So Maksym Butkevych is a prominent human rights defender committed to protecting refugees, asylum seekers, and marginalized communities in Ukraine. What he was doing for the last good 2 decades. He was working on intersection of human rights, anti-racism, and social justice. As journalist and left-wing activist, he has been involved in many different NGOs and activism. Even from his youth, he participated in 1990 student mobilization, which led to Ukraine's independence. He studied philosophy at Kyiv University and anthropology at the University of Sussex. He is a co-founder of several very important human rights organizations like Social Action and Zmina Human Rights Center. He was also in the board of Amnesty International Ukraine, and he contributed to organizing of many of us, I think, know this film festival of International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival, DocuDays UA, which is Ukraine's foremost human rights documentary festival. We know each other since 2011, since already quite a time, when we started to work on a case of Olaolufemi. Just to give you a brief example of what Maksym was doing, Olaolufemi was a Nigerian student who was studying at Medical University in Luhansk and who was accused on fabricated racistic charges and who sentenced life defense. And due to a struggle and fight of Maksym and other friends from Simferopol, from Luhansk, from Kyiv, and from also a little bit from us in Berlin, Olaolufemi could be really released, and he was not sitting his whole life sentenced to this very, very strange and very obscure sentence. Just for you to imagine what the kind of work Maksym was doing. As a journalist, he reported on mistreatment and torture and arbitrary arrests for Euromaidan source. After the occupation of Crimea by Russia in 2014, he founded the Solidarity Committee for the Kremlin hostages to support political prisoners in Crimea. And as a journalist, he co-founded Hromadske Radio, what I already mentioned a little bit. This is an independent, non-oligarch funded station dedicated to defend social workers, women's and minority rights. This is actually a very, very brief explanation of what Maksym was doing, because he was doing much, much more, and it was difficult for me to squeeze it for you. But I think we all now have a little bit broader picture. And at the end of February 22, he voluntarily joined the Ukraine Armed Forces. On June 24, 2022, he was captured by the Russian army in the Luhansk region and later sentenced to 13 years in prison based on fabricated charges. And after significant international pressure, he was finally released on October 18, 2024 as part of prisoner exchange involving 95 Ukrainian defenders. And last but not least, since his release, he resumed his human rights work, focusing on protecting rights of illegally detained civilians in prisoners of war, countering Russian propaganda and hate speech, and reforming Ukraine's migrational policies. And he's a member of Expert Council of the Center for Civil Liberties and serves on the Executive Council of PAN-Ukraine. I think it was still important. Sorry for introducing you so long. Maksym, my first question will be not about your previous work, but really about your views as a human rights activist. You joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces on end of February 2022. In the book with your essays, which you can all found in front of. Here I wrote in one essay, which you have written in 2006, about a case, and you're writing with very big joy. I didn't know about the case. It was in the context of the Iraq war, completely another context than our war, about how anti-war activists disarmed an US aircraft at the US military base in Ireland. And you are just writing with a huge joy that they were found not guilty. In this essay, it can be seen very good that you're really an anti-militarist. And I will ask you the question what you have been probably already asked, but it's still, I think it's still important. How does it fit together? How does it fit together that an anti-militarist goes to war, takes a weapon in the hand, and did the war change your anti-militarist convictions?
Thank you very much. Well, that's a good question to start, but I, of course, would like in the first place to thank all the organizers of this event and thank you all for coming. It's not easy, frankly, to be here, especially after such an introduction and such a greeting you offered me. It is, I still don't know what to do in these situations, you know, like what, it's unbelievable somehow. And also, especially when I think, and from time to time it still happens, that less than 5 months ago, I was still in the colony of strict regime, penal colony in occupied part of Luhansk region, controlled by Russians. If someone told me that, you know, in less than 5 months, I'll be here and I'll be greeted by all of you wonderful people this way, I don't know if I would believe it. Maybe even yes, but I couldn't imagine it anyway. So this is slightly unreal, but this is the most real thing I've ever experienced as all these months since my release from captivity. So thank you very much. When it comes to the question, it's a very good question. Yes, I've been asked it a lot. For some reason, it was, especially among international audiences and international media, I was called a pacifist quite often. It is all a matter of definition, of course. It depends what you mean by pacifism. If it's about someone who protests war, who despises violence, and tries to prevent it, then I am the one. But as it happens, more often it is used for the stance, the position that force cannot be used under any circumstances. And if this is the definition, that I am not, and I've never been. For one simple reason, I truly believe, and it's not only a rational belief, but it is a feeling, it is a belief which goes somehow down to my fundamentals, that if one witnesses or is present at the crime committed, like huge crime, which is only preventable by force and doesn't do anything, that this person becomes an accomplice to this crime. If I can try to stop a genocidal war together with dozens and hundreds of thousands of others, and I don't do that, that I am complicit to the genocidal war. I am part of it. Do I want it or not? But it falls under my responsibility, my personal one. And this is how I feel, and this is how I think. And this is why, to me, it is impossible. Thus, when Ukraine has been attacked full scale by Russia on the 24th of February 2022, we were put in a position we never wanted to find ourselves in. We had to defend ourselves, we had to defend our loved ones, we had to defend our communities, but first and foremost, we had to defend our values, because basically we were attacked not only because of who we are. People who came to my city, I was in Kyiv at the time. I'm from Kyiv myself, it's my native city. And the battle started to rage straight away on the outskirts of Kyiv. Those dozens of thousands of people who came to kill us or to subjugate us, they didn't know us, they've never met us personally. It wasn't for something we've done. It was for the choices we've made in previous years. We wanted to choose our own destiny. We wanted to have an agency and to implement it. When we were experiencing the more and more authoritarian rule by, say, Viktor Yanukovych, we decided not just to obey and stay silent and survive, but we decided that we should choose a different path. And really treasured, I mean, of course it is a generalization, but as a community we really treasured our freedom, and we believed in our agency, that we are able to change our lives. Another fundamental thing, another fundamental value was dignity, that human dignity should be respected, that we should respect each other's dignity, even if we disagree with each other. You know, Ukrainian community is very good at fighting each other, at discussions which are even going into nasty overtones, but still it is about being in discussion, trying to build together our common future. And this is something that goes against the fundamental things Russian world, like Pax Russica, is built upon, Ruski Mir. And unfortunately, I can confirm it now by being there inside of it. I've seen it from inside. So this is how I joined it. And this is why I am still an anti-militarist, because I believe that military means are very limited and they can be used under certain extreme circumstances and never should expand themselves upon the society as a whole. I still think you might be surprised that war is a bad thing. War is a terrible nightmare. War is one of the biggest tragedies. No one, not a single human being, should live through war. And unfortunately, we all do. Now, I mean, all of us in Ukraine at least, I still despise violence, maybe more than ever. And I am a senior lieutenant of the armed forces of Ukraine, and proud of it, I should say. It is not surprising that the armed forces of Ukraine and Ukrainian defense forces in general, because, you know, there are also National Guard, which also fight in, and there are territorial defense. They have the biggest trust, according to the polls, among the institutions in Ukrainian society, because now they are not professional military, they represent Ukrainian society as it is. Because the vast majority of those who wear Ukrainian military uniform at the moment are people who represent different sections of Ukrainian society, and first and foremost, those who used to do manual work, who used to feed people, used to drive their taxis, our taxis, who are carpenters and farmers and teachers and journalists and human rights defenders. So Ukrainian army is a representation of Ukrainian society at the moment, so it's a much bigger thing than just a militarist machine. And when it comes to the text you've mentioned about Ireland and the group of peace activists disarming the American military aircraft, well, I was anti-war. I took part in the movement against the invasion of Iraq, not because I love Saddam Hussein. I never did. but because that war was built upon the false premises. It was built on lies, as well as this current war was launched under false premises by the Russian Federation. I don't put it on the same level, no, of course not. But when it comes specifically to Ireland, that group of activists were found not guilty for one simple reason. What they've done was lawful. Ireland, being neutral, offered a space and technical capabilities to one of the fighting sides by this supporting it. So it is more about hypocrisy, which we witness so much nowadays. And this is why when I hear someone, would it be from Germany, from here, or from the United States, as yesterday, or from elsewhere, who says, you know, I think I'm for peace. I'm for peace, I'm against war. This is why I think we should stop supporting Ukraine. To me, it's a hypocrisy at its maximum. Because, you know, this is... We live in a free world. Well, relatively. We have something to compare to. And yeah, of course, everyone can say, you know, I think Ukraine should not be supported. It's an opinion. But just do it honestly and say, I want Ukraine not to exist. I want Ukrainians to be subjected to genocide. I am on the side of aggressor. I support invaders, oppressors, and genocidal war, crimes against humanity and war crimes. And this is why I think Ukraine should not be supported. It will be honest. It's fine, just say it. But when one says, you know, I'm for peace, I'm nice, so let this genocidal war go to its maximum, something is wrong. It's about honesty, intellectual but also a moral one.
Thank you for these very important words. I would like to move now a little bit and to speak a little bit about your experience in war captivity. You have experienced firsthand what it means to be a prisoner in war in Russian captivity, and I would like to ask you, what human rights violations did you witness in Russian captivity, and how did the treatment of prisoners reflect broader Russian policies towards Ukraine, broader Russian policy, what they're thinking about Ukraine and about Ukrainian people?
Yes, it is somehow ironic. I was told so several times by my colleagues already that as well as not only human rights colleagues, actually, Oleg Sentsov, Ukrainian film director and currently Ukrainian military officer, who was also a prisoner of Kremlin, being arrested in Crimea in 2014 and released only 5.5 years later. I tried to support him and his co-accused on his case. And when I was released, we talked over the phone, and he said, "You are the only one I know who supported political prisoners and captives. And then you became political prisoner and a captive. And then you came out and you are again supporting political prisoners. Aren't you tired, like going back and forth and back and forth?" It was, sometimes I say it, but it's only half joke that I had 2 years and 4 months of some sort of a field research when it comes to human rights in Russia and in Russian captivity in particular. Because things I knew from theory, I knew from reports, I knew from testimonies of those who went through this. But probably it was necessary that I experienced them firsthand and I witnessed them with my own eyes. I think I now got more intimate knowledge of what it means, human rights inside of Russian captivity, Russian prison, and Russian Federation as such. It is difficult to list, well, it is possible to list, but it might be either boring or horrible to list all the human rights violations. What I can say that when it comes to Ukrainian prisoners of war, you know, their status, our status, had to be regulated by the international humanitarian law, by the Third Geneva Convention in particular, in the first place. I've told this a few times before, but I think it is, for me, really important. On our second day of captivity, we were still transported to Luhansk, and we were visited by some Russian military officers who probably were responsible for information. And they talked to us one by one. They were wearing balaclavas, which was a good sign. So we've seen people wearing balaclavas. We knew that they are afraid to show their faces, which means that probably we'll stay alive for some time. We won't be executed straight away, hopefully. And they started their communication with words. Well, first ones were about war, that there is no war. There is just special military operation. And then they proceeded to, you think you are prisoners of war. You are not. You will be probably prisoners of war when you reach your destination point. You are registered as such, and then all Geneva Conventions will start to apply to you. In the meantime, you just disappeared in the battle zone. And if you do any wrongdoing, if you don't obey any single order, you might never reappear again. And if you are in doubt, we can take you to the backyard where there is a hole in the soil, and you'll see those who didn't get the point. Do you want to have a walk? They asked. I said, somehow I didn't want to have a walk. And they were lying, of course, because when we reached our destination point and we were registered, Geneva Conventions never started to apply to us. There were no Geneva Conventions whatsoever. When it comes to treatment, well, physical violence, meaning basically tortures during the interrogations, were kind of norm. Of course, a lot dependent on what kind of interrogator happened to be with you. I was one of the fortunate ones, frankly speaking. I was not tortured that much, no. I was just beaten probably a couple of times, and other times kicks and punches and stress positions and excessive physical exercises. When it comes to electric shock, or proper application of electric shock, I was just threatened with it. But unfortunately, some of my cellmates happened to be with other interrogators, and they were subjected to all kinds of mistreatment. When it comes to conditions, we were poorly fed. Each of us has lost a lot of weight. Food was appalling and awful. There were no hygiene items. I mentioned several times, but starting with toilet paper, we didn't have toilet paper. So we had to invent a lot of things. How to cut our fingernails when there is nothing to do that with. Well, we scratched them against the walls, and so on and so forth. We were never taken out for a walk, so we just sat in our cells. So within half a year, our skin became strange, very tender, bluish, grayish, greenish tones, etc. And of course, threats all of the time. The whole atmosphere was an atmosphere of fear. But then I actually came across Geneva Conventions as a wording. That was in my court verdict. When they fabricated the criminal case against me, they accused me of breaching Geneva Conventions when it comes to civilians. So I was found guilty and sentenced as a war criminal for breaching Geneva Conventions, never respected by those who sentenced me. They used Geneva Conventions for one simple thing, to fabricate criminal cases. And this was it. So basically what I witnessed, especially after I talked to other convicted POWs, that Russian Federation's leadership and all those who obey their orders, they persistently try to undermine, basically to destroy the system of international humanitarian law, a system of human rights as such, and to replace it with might makes right world. This is a policy. These are no exceptional cases. This is not something that happens here and there. This is a consistent policy of the state. And it's not surprising given the fact that in the worldview of our guards, of our executioners, and apparently a lot of those whom I was serving my time together with, charged with criminal offenses, those who live in this Russian world. Human being is nothing. An individual means nothing. It is a dispensable material which should serve the state. And the state is everything, especially embodied, in particular, national leader and his assistants, cronies, accomplices, you call them. And this worldview is so opposite to everything we stand for in Ukraine, and not only in Ukraine, actually. So this was one of my conclusions I've brought with myself back to Ukraine, and yeah, I've seen it.
Thank you. Maybe one more question about this. Did people from Russia whom you met there said anything about their plans about Ukraine or Europe?
Well, yes, of course. Again, starting with those same people who told me that we are not prisoners of war, at some point our conversation moved from threatening into more conversational mode. They realized I used to be a journalist and a human rights defender, which was kind of a little bit funny for them, but they decided to, ask questions suddenly and to talk. They wanted to talk. And they said that they acknowledged that the special military operation didn't go as planned originally, because originally they planned to eliminate Ukraine in a few weeks' time. And we were talking after a few months since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and they were still extremely far from their goal. But they said, anyway, we'll do it. The Ukrainian stage will be over together with Ukraine, and by that moment, we'll have the most battle-hardened army in Europe, they said, and we'll be so ready to move forward. And as we could already kind of talk, so I asked them, forward to where? Poland or Baltic states? Where to? And they sneered and said, why limit ourselves with Poland? Of course, they were not those who make decisions, but it reflected an overall mood among Russian professional military and a lot of Russian so-called politicians. And later on, when within almost a year, I finally had access to Russian television. This is when I was convicted and transferred to another part of prison where those charged with criminal offenses were held. And they were treated much lighter than Ukrainian prisoners of war or Ukrainian civilians in captivity. They had TV, among other things, and they had toilet paper. They had a lot of things. TV is never switched off. If you have a TV in your cell, it just works 24/7. Light never switches off, but this is a demand from an administration. They should always see you. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people have problems with their eyesight afterwards, including myself, by the way. But TV is never switched off by the inmates' decision. They want some kind of window to the bigger world, larger world. So I had to consume a lot of Russian TV propaganda. And they were very open and honest about few things. In particular, that they do not regard this war, special military operation, as war against Ukraine, but they said it bluntly, it is war against the West and everything the West represents, against that liberal, degraded civilization which has forgotten what the traditional values are. And so this is the task of Russian soldier to remind them what it feels like. You know, to me, it was strange afterwards when I was out of captivity to see how many people in other countries just don't take it, don't get it. They somehow believe that they lie on their propaganda TV, that this is not true, that they want only Ukraine. They say it bluntly, and people maybe just for their, I don't know, psychological comfort, prefer not to listen to that. And before I had access to TV, I didn't know that at the time, but I could actually listen to it when the guards spoke to us. Because a lot of brainwashed guards, prison guards in particular, when they open their mouths on political issues, basically these were Russian propagandists speaking out of their heads. Even the wordings were the same, that Ukraine does not exist, that Ukraine exists, but it is an aberration, it should not. That Ukrainians are some sort of spoiled Russians who do not want to acknowledge it and will force them to acknowledge it. And of course that Ukraine is not more than, well, this worldview was full of contradictions, of course, which didn't matter. Like Ukraine is a state with Nazi ideology. They said it all of the time. As well as Ukraine does not exist as a state. Ukrainians are Banderites and Nazis by design. Ukraine is not more than a puppet for the Americans. It all somehow coexisted, and the contradictions were not visible. When it comes to those charged with criminal offenses, they could say, you know, the best time in Luhansk was under Ukraine, really. But then they said, but Putin is a cool guy. And like, I've seen those pro-Russian proxies, one of them said, and they're criminals. They behaved like criminals. But we should be grateful they defended us from you. I said, well, actually, when they defended you from us, you were part of Ukraine. And they started to either switch the subject or to get angry. Because this worldview is full of contradictions. It's not about rational thinking. It is about emotional satisfaction, feeling of belonging to this huge power, huge machine, even if you are lost yourself. I've heard this being said several times as well, that we live in, I'll translate to like language which is not used in, from present language into normal one. We live under terrible conditions, and we know that our children will live this way, unfortunately. But we cannot change our lives. Our leaders will have their way anyway. We should just obey and stay silent, and will be fed and maybe safe. But instead, we belong to such a huge power that we are feared by all other peoples around us, which means we are respected. They were really surprised when I said that fear and respect are actually sometimes opposite things. They couldn't get it. So this worldview it looks like that. It is full of contradictions, but it is based on psychological mechanisms rather than rational thinking. And there is no critical thinking, of course, at all.
Thank you, Maksym. I think it's extremely important for all of us here to know it and to hear these voices. Now I wanted to move a little bit to the Next topic. You described some human rights violations and also war crimes. Ukrainian General Prosecutor registered over 150,000 war crimes. We have thousands of people, tens of thousands who are civilians and who are captured, illegally captured. So we have thousands of Ukrainians who continue to suffer and experience forced deportations and war crimes. And in this situation, what does justice mean for you and for Ukrainians? Maybe given the perspective that justice in Ukrainian has two meanings. We have justice as spravedlivost, justice as justice for somebody as human being, and jurisdictional justice, правосуддя. What does it mean for you in this situation and for Ukrainians?
Yeah, this is not the easy question. And actually, thank you for pointing out, this was mentioned and debated even for some time, that in a number of languages of our region, there are two words for justice, which gives you an idea of how traditional and embedded the notion of corruption in judicial system is in the region. There is justice as some universal justice which should be done, and there is spravedlivost, and there is pravosudya, which is right judiciary, or right courts, correct courts. And this is a different thing, apparently. But there is a huge demand in Ukrainian society for both, and they actually are in intentions and in goals in people's minds. They are merged now, because everyone understands that without functional judicial system, there will be no justice in any way. It is a difficult subject to discuss because, well, those who are aware of previous historical experience know that in vast majority of, say, wars or conflicts, justice has not been done 100%, or maybe even less than that, that there were perpetrators of the most vicious and horrible crimes who actually escaped justice, who managed to live happily thereafter. Unfortunately, it's not that I want them to suffer or anything, but I believe that people should respond for what they have done. This is about responsibility. This is the word which actually in a number of languages is about responding. It's the same in Ukrainian. Відповідальність is about відповідь. Responsibility about response. Responsibility, and even in Russian. Ответственность is about ответ. It is how people respond to the question, what have you done and why have you done this? What were your grounds? What was your purpose when you inflicted such horrible suffering as Russian invaders did upon Ukrainian population? You have to respond. And I think this is an ultimate wish of millions of Ukrainians now. It has a judicial dimension. There are Ukrainian national institutions working on that. There are criminal cases being opened. There are Ukrainian courts at work. But of course, a lot of Ukrainians, both among the state authorities and among non-governmental sector, rely upon international mechanisms a lot. International Criminal Court, which unfortunately is currently under attack on so many sides. On a special tribunal for war of aggression, or crime of launching a war of aggression organized by the Council of Europe, and also upon the mechanisms of universal jurisdiction, including the one which exists in Germany. so that those who were perpetrators of war crimes could be brought to justice if they come on German soil and they cannot just go visit, historical cities of Germany or enjoy local food or do their business here, thinking that they will go unpunished. They should respond sooner or later. And again, I really want, me personally, not to confuse justice and revenge. These are two very different things. They are the opposite sometimes things. And it's not only about military, and it's not only about those who tortured POWs and civilians, not only about those who were giving orders. It is also about those who made it possible. To me, a very important issue is an issue of responsibility of Russian propagandists, for instance, who for some unclear to me reason sometimes are still called Russian journalists. They're not journalists, come on. Journalism is a profession, and propaganda is a profession, but they're just different professions. And what they do has nothing to do with journalism, but they made this war possible. They fueled it, they inflamed hatred, they dehumanized millions of people so that those millions of people, can be easily killed afterwards, because they are not really human. They are just Ukrainians. And they should be brought to justice as well. I truly believe it. So to me, it is a very important topic. If my answers, by the way, are too long, you just tell me. I want to share one more thing. When the first interrogation on my criminal case took place, well, they were called interrogations. They were never interrogations. I would just sign in papers. But the first interrogation took place where I actually learned that there is a criminal case opened against me. It was a forceful interrogation. It lasted for several hours. It was painful. It was stressful. It was, to put it very mildly, uncomfortable. And I was explained my options, basically. My options were very simple. Either I signed the confessions without reading them. I will find out later what I'm accused of. And I'm sentenced, convicted as a war criminal, and in a very short time I am exchanged. Or I don't cooperate, and they will kill me. Just plain and simple. They actually offered me to be taken to the courtyard straight away and executed there. Or more sophisticatedly, I would try to escape, and they, of course, had to use firearms. But most probably, if I'm not cooperating, they will not bother with doing this. They will put me in a cell with cooperating inmates, and they will turn my life into living hell, so that every morning and every night I will curse the moment when I decided not to cooperate, and I will not get out unbroken. I will be broken physically and mentally by the moment when, within years and years, I probably could be released if my health allows me to. So my options were very simple, and they physically demonstrated some parts of it, you know. When I came back to my cell, I had to, well, yeah, I couldn't support my head. It was really painful. And the first person I thought of was my great-grandfather, whom I never met, because he was executed in 1938 during the Great Terror as the enemy of the people in Poltava region, by the decision of Troika, as a member of counter-revolutionary network, spy for number of foreign states, etc. I actually had an access to his file, and I've seen the protocol of his interrogation, a very short protocol, given that the interrogation was going on for hours. And the first question was, tell us when you were involved, when you became involved in counter-revolutionary network. And he responded, I don't know what you are talking about. I have no idea. I'm a simple peasant. And the next question was, we know you are lying. You should tell us who involved you in this organization. And his next answer is, sure, I confess and acknowledge that I was lying, I was involved. I know very well what happened between his first answer and the next question. I knew that before, but now I know it firsthand. And I know how he changed his answers. And 84 years later, in next millennia, his great-grandson in a neighboring region of Ukraine had to sign the confession about something he wasn't doing, he hasn't done, under duress. Okay, was not sentenced to execution, just 13 years of imprisonment, because the system is the same. The system was never demolished, it was never broken. It found refuge, it was in hiding on Russian territory for some time, and then it came back, and it wanted to expand again. It was never destroyed as it had to. And one of, part of it was that those responsible for those deeds were never brought to justice. And I think this is our task now, to stop this machine, the system, to demolish it, to the point that it can never be resurrected again. And for this, we should bring those responsible to justice, or we face the risk that within 80-something years, our great-grandsons and daughters somewhere could be forced to sign a confession into some wrongdoing they never committed.
Thank you. I think we saw all how important justice is, also in terms of history. So the history is not repeating or will not repeat itself. I also think that Germany's role in supporting justice could be totally important. Germany has played a very important role in ensuring justice, for example, for people in Syria. We had in April 2020 the very first case worldwide in Koblenz over 2 former officials from Bashar al-Assad, and they were really convicted. I will have now the last question. I have many more, but I think you all have many questions to Maksym, and then I will open it to you all. I wanted to come back a little bit to your book. I read in one of the essays your description about human rights violations in Crimea, 2016. And I wanted to ask you, so far, if you know anything. I think we all don't hear somehow anything from Crimea. It's silence. It's as it any human rights violations are happening there, but we know all that there is no freedom of speech and there is torture and so on. So do you know anything about the current situation with human rights in Crimea, or have you heard anything?
Yes, I had the chance actually to learn about it. Yeah, I agree that information from Crimea is somehow not on the radars at the moment due to everything that's happening elsewhere in Ukraine. Not only in Ukraine, though. But it's not a silence of landed milk and honey, definitely. It's not that everything is prosperous and peaceful. It is not a silence of a graveyard neither, but it is a silence of a prison camp. Crimea currently is basically a territory which is controlled, and everyone who is disobedient is persecuted and prosecuted, not only for what they are doing, but also on fabricated charges. There were political prisoners, there are political prisoners currently. I'm very bad at numbers, like memorizing numbers, but I think it is very easy to find this information. I was fortunate, soon upon my release, to meet a person whom I've heard about for quite some time and who was released a few months before me, Nariman Jalal, who is the deputy head of Majlis of Crimean Tatar people. And we were so happy to finally meet him liberated slightly before me, and I liberated a bit later. So we had a lot of common jokes, you know, like a prisoner to a prisoner, inmate to an inmate, some kind of special ones. But I had a chance to talk to him more or less extensively, and he publishes a lot about what's going on in Crimea. He served 2.5 years upon fabricated charges. He actually thought that he will be imprisoned for belonging to Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, and this is the representational body of Crimean Tatar people, which Russia pronounced extremist organization and banned. So the very belonging to it is a crime in Russia. But apparently they decided to fabricate a criminal case against him, although they could put him behind bars for who he really is. And this is a very typical for contemporary Russian machine. So number of prisoners in Crimea, but also those who were shipped out of Crimea to Russia proper, convicted on both fabricated charges and belonging to undesirable extremist or pronounced terrorist organizations is growing. What they try to do is to destroy the support networks of relatives of political prisoners. And if you are a relative and you are active, you risk to find yourself behind bars very soon as well. Civic journalism, which existed and still exists in Crimea, is also almost destroyed by the repressions. But what probably is even more important is that they try to change the population dynamic in Crimea, inviting a lot of people from Russia proper to take over properties left behind by those repressed, oppressed, or those who were forced to leave the peninsula. And there are many more people living in the peninsula now and trying to escape Russian Federation as such for one simple reason. They mobilize people to take part in war against Ukraine. And those Crimeans, not only Crimean Tatars, who thought that they will live quietly, you know, not protesting under Russian rule, suddenly found themselves being drafted and sent to kill their former, as they think, compatriots. And they don't want to do that. So currently the situation in Crimea is probably worse than ever, but the thing is that the world doesn't follow, not anymore. And for some people, especially abroad, Crimea is kind of a closed issue. Well, you know, it belongs to. While as a matter of fact, as I think all of you now understand, as we understand, if the world, if international, if European community would react to violent takeover by Russia of part of Ukrainian territory in 2014, we would not be where we are at the moment. We would not have this nasty war. But unfortunately, 11 years ago, it wasn't taken seriously, and we have to face consequences.
Thank you, Maksym. I think it's extremely important to talk about Crimea, and if I know that there are representatives here of different organizations, if you are thinking about something, so please do speak loudly about Crimea, because the silence is there not because nothing is happening. The silence is because people are deprived of the possibility to express anything about human rights violations there. I would like now to open our small podium to the public. Daria is helping with the micro. Do you have questions? I know you have questions. Please.
Hello, Maksym. Thank you for being here. I don't really know where to start, but just start in East Germany, where I'm from, where resistance to the belief of what is happening is staggering. 35% voted for AfD, a large number for the, I don't know what to call this Wagenknecht party, but up round about just under 50% for Russian propaganda. And I'm frankly at a loss what to do. What I try to do is bring knowledge in those provincial regions. So I would very much ask you to make some time at some point and come to East German provinces to talk about your experiences, as well as to church members, parsons, priests of the Protestant church. I come from the East German church opposition, and a lot of East German parsons do not believe that violence can be used against the aggressor. So just to say where I'm coming from, and what do you think can we do at a moment where I think in large parts for reasons of social injustice we see happening what is happening in the United States?
Thank you very much. Well, I think what you are trying to do, as you mentioned, passing along essential information. Well, information gathering and information spreading, which stands at the core of both real quality journalism and real human rights defense, is essential, because this is where it all starts. And this is actually what happens in Russia, where some sorts, some kinds of information are just banned. It doesn't mean that people cannot get it. If they want, they can. They just don't want to, the vast majority, unfortunately. But it is very important to pass along the information. If someone, for instance, holds pro-Russian position, again, this is a free country so far. Here, well, as long as these people are not in the majority, he or she can do that, but they have to face the facts. Because what we witness also, what I witnessed in Russian captivity was very similar to what I've heard recently from over the ocean. What Mr. Trump actually voiced were the same messages our guards passed to us in captivity. He literally spoke as the guard of Russian penitentiary system when he said all these things that, Zelensky is a dictator and Ukraine should not have do this and that, and that Ukraine relies upon American assistance only. These are like quotes from Russian guards who were guarding us. And I was so appalled by that. Actually, I've even written opinion on that, not intended for anything, but it was published specifically because of that. But what is also common is that both sides now, they deny the facts. Because when guards told us that Ukraine should not have provoked the war, they said, provoke the war. But the fact is plain and simple. I asked, whose armed forces entered whose territory? Just tell me. And there was awkward silence because, you know, there is a fact. You can try to manipulate information, you can try to set up some weird behind-the-looking-glass worldview, but you cannot say that Ukrainian armed forces entered Russia and attacked no matter what. No, it was vice versa. Then, of course, you might try to explain it, why it happened, but there are hard facts which are denied in front of our eyes. It is really Orwellian. It is very Orwellian world. So I think the first thing is to really to spread and pass information. It is very important. To talk to people, it is really important. And to take part in actions and acts of solidarity, both with Ukraine and with Ukrainians abroad. And with Ukraine, there are so many ways people can support, because of course Ukraine relies a great deal upon international solidarity. For one simple reason, I mean, it is a common thing. It is a war of attrition, and Ukrainian resources are incomparable with the Russian ones. So I was amazed when I went out of captivity how, the word mentioned today, how resilient Ukrainians turned out to be. It is really impressive. But our resources are not endless. So we rely a lot upon international solidarity on all levels, starting from the state assistance and ending with grassroots level, or maybe vice versa, actually. And this is why today, thank you very much. Goes my gratitude to the organizers. We have these donate things, like Hospitaliere, which is very famous medical initiative saving lives of Ukrainians in uniform. And Hromadske Radio, which is an independent radio station, I was proudly one of the co-founders of Hromadske Radio at some point, which is not funded by oligarchs or the state. But of course, due to that, it is in dire straits, in very bad financial situation constantly. So, and it tries to keep up standards of independent journalism. But it's not only about financial assistance. It can be very different. So information gathering and spreading, talking to people, organizing events, maybe influencing local politicians or decision makers as well as at higher levels, and acting in solidarity. These are just some of the ways which can be done. But thank you very much for doing this. Thanks.
Just a small remark. The text you have written, what we have heard from Trump, actually you have heard it from the Russian interrogators, it's not translated into German yet, no? No. So if anybody feels has some time, let's translate the text and let's spread really the word, because the text is great. It's very short written and very understandable written, what is actually coming from Mr. Trump. And another thing, Frederica asked if you're going to East Germany, you will visit Leipzig? No, Maksym will come to Leipzig. So first steps, or further steps. We will continue with questions, if you have any. I know everybody's there. Alexandra? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for this very insightful talk. I have a question on your reflections on the evolution of the global human rights community, maybe from 2014 to now, how, because here my question comes from that I observed in Berlin, there were some left human rights organizations were not sure how to position themselves with regards to Ukraine and what is happening, how to stand or not stand, what are the limitations of what they can do. So if you can give more your overview of how do you think this human rights organizations globally change their views on Ukraine, on war, on defense, I don't know, and do you get more support internationally or less, or has it always been like that? So, yeah, reflections on this.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm knowledgeable enough about all these years, especially this 2.5 years I had to skip somehow. What I can say that since 2014, at least some of human rights organizations, international ones, for some time, especially after 2016, 2017, sometimes they were the only providers of information of what's going on in the occupied territories, as well as about the political repressions in Russia proper. So I think their role is indisposable, but I'm not sure to what extent it reflects the overall human rights community. To me, well, I will not say anything new. I think when it comes to human rights, we live in quite alarming times, because human rights, apart from being a great concept and a very important system of values we uphold, in the 20th century, it became unique because it was acknowledged, at least formally, like sometimes hypocritically, but acknowledged as important factor which shapes or should shape the policies. At some point in 20th century, at the end of it, to say that our policies will ignore human rights whatsoever was almost impossible if you wanted to be recognized as a country which cares about contemporary important things. And now we see that back in the open are forces which are mighty ones, which take decisions and influence decision-making processes, not only in their countries, but globally, who demonstrate their contempt to the very notion of human rights, or to the way they are shaped in one of the most, among other things, poetic texts produced ever by humankind, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The very notion that all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights and should treat each other in the spirit of brotherhood, I would say, I would add, and sisterhood, of course. The first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is something that goes openly against the Russian world system of values, as well as, I'm afraid it looks like Mr. Trump's system of values. Brotherhood, free, dignity, what? It's just, no. And I'm afraid that we face very powerful adversaries who try to change the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. Well, it means that, yes, okay, we have to face them. When it comes to the developments and attitudes of different human rights organizations or activists towards Ukrainian situation or Russian war waged against Ukraine, as well as to some other conflicts and wars, I'm afraid sometimes I witnessed that human rights activists and organizations shaped their attitude not based on human rights values, but based on, well, political leaning, affiliation, maybe ideological stance, and of course it was detrimental. For instance, it came to, well, just taking a step aside from purely human rights situation, there is a number of international thinkers who for years or maybe decades protested against imperialism. and justly so, of course, because imperialism, this product of past times went out of fashion, fortunately. It is inconsistent with human rights values. But at some point, they were so consumed by equaling every imperialism to just American imperialism that everything that America supports or supported became bad. And everything that goes against the US became good. And suddenly we found ourselves in a situation when people who did not support Ukraine after 2014, because they've seen Ukrainian authorities being supported by the American, at the time, American administration, they came to the conclusion that basically proxy republics, so-called republics in the east of Ukraine, created by Russian occupation, are their allies. There are even those. They somehow missed that imperialism can take different forms, that Russian imperialism is also imperialism, somehow. And we see that some of thinkers who influenced me as well at some point currently are not on our side of the front line, and I think this is a grave mistake on their side. They missed the point where intellectually thriving critics and criticism of international politics turned into some sort of conspiracy theory and very simplistic worldview. And this is a very sad situation for me, especially in the environment we live in now. I don't know if it answers your question, but thank you.
Thank you. We will take now another question, just a small remark from my side. I think it's of crucial importance in the situation what Maksym described to establish human rights organizations in, for example, in Germany from Ukrainian activists who fled, and we have many activists who fled, to establish anti-racist leftist Ukrainian organizations who will fight for human rights and who could be a bridge to those human rights organizations, Alexandra, you mentioned, because for now we have only maybe Common Sense Communications of Marina Hovoruchina, the co-founder of ZMINA, a totally important organization which is fighting for illegally detained civilians. We have Kvitne Queer, an organization which is fighting for LGBTQ persons from Ukraine, but not many more. So it's, I mean, just encouraging if there are any people here who are thinking about it, this is what is really missing. We could take some more questions. I saw here a lady in blue. Nora, do you want to put a question, or it's already gone? Okay, then behind. Yeah, thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Yulia Bidenko from Kyiv University, and I'm really glad to see you here, Maksym, because we have met in 2017, and you were trainer on hate speech and stereotypes, and I was really touched by your very strict, moral-based and, caring approach to the topic. And now teaching media and politics, where this topic is also very essential to my students in Kharkiv, I sometimes getting puzzled how, to nuance, how to balance this topic to those who survived the occupation of Izum or who lost their relatives in trenches, or those who has been forced to leave their homes probably forever. So it's kind of provocative questions, but I address them to myself too. But if your, let's say, views on hate speech during the conflict, or let's say stereotypization that could be used as a counter propaganda or could be used as a politicians or even activists ever changed, and how we need to address it, because a lot of us on the battle lines, on the battlefields and others really cannot be, very neutral during this conflict. So I really would be appreciate if you can touch upon this very sensitive topic and how Ukraine came back to normal, let's say, after the sustainable peace or its ceasefire. So what mechanism can we use just to get back to liberal democratic agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, well, no, probably not until tomorrow, but I'll try to keep it short. I'll try. I didn't say I will. Well, on the first part, on hate speech and stereotypes and dehumanization, yes, thank you very much for remembering my training. I was a trainer. I conducted a lot of trainings on actually countering hate speech, not on hate speech, on countering hate speech. But there was one thing actually Russian propagandists, what they said was true. They said a couple of times that in Ukrainian schools, children learn Goebbels. Not correct. In my trainings, we analyzed Goebbels' text. It was true, because we analyzed hate speech and how it creates the atmosphere in which later on, years after, it can lead to creation of genocidal situation. So at least one thing Russians said, right? Yeah, we studied Goebbels, it was true. Well, we studied also 10 commandments of Hutu. It didn't make us Hutu, though, but from Rwandan genocide. I think it is a very difficult question, actually, because the war. Well, on one hand, my views didn't change, because if not hate speech used massively for more than a decade by Russian propaganda, they would not have the hundreds of thousands of Russian nationals been ready to go and kill people in Ukraine. It was just another example of how hate speech creates a precondition to war of aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. But we are already at it. We are in the warlike situation. And war is a tragedy not only due to pain and suffering it brings, not because it takes away from us our loved ones and destroys our homes and floods our country with rivers of blood and with grief and with sorrow. Also because it destroys our humanity. It makes us confusing, a lot of us, justice and revenge. It makes us objectifying other people. Yeah, really, making them stereotypical. And in general, I truly believe it. On the battlefield, for many people, when they fight, usually in order to kill another human being, mostly, on purpose, one has to dehumanize the target, at least a little bit. Otherwise, it is next to impossible. And dehumanization is an inseparable partner of war and of combat. And it is a terrible nightmare. It is a really bad thing. But what is worse is when it does not take place on the battlefield. Much worse is when it takes place, in a comfy apartment, on a comfy sofa, in front of television. For the soldier, it is a necessity, and for everyone else, it is not. So to me, these are very difficult times, but still, again, to me, subjectively, there are things which lines which cannot be crossed. I truly believe that we should not seek revenge. This an eye for an eye approach. We had this conversation, I mentioned it a couple of times, we had this conversation in the penal colony among convicted Ukrainian prisoners of war. From time to time, someone said, it's interesting, how do our guys, like Ukrainians, how do they treat Russian-Ukrainian POWs? Do they treat them at least a little bit the same way they treat us? I really hope so. And straight away, I didn't even have a minute to interfere. The other Ukrainian POWs interfered and said, stop it. No, we should not do that. Well, in the first place, it is not possible. Our POW camps are monitored. They are open to access. They are open to international monitoring. No international organization had access to us. We actually waited for ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross. Then we stopped waiting. Then we started to make jokes about ICRC, really. But it's different with Ukrainian camps. But at the same time, the second thing was that we cannot be like them. We should not turn into them. If they mistreat us this way, it doesn't mean that our loved ones or our brothers and sisters in arms back in Ukraine should mistreat them. No, because the very bottom line of this war is that we should not turn into them. We are different. Our values are different. And to me, the same goes about stereotypes. Now it is common, well, maybe you've noticed, I say Russians did. Russians did, Russians said. Of course, I mean Russian occupiers. I do not believe in collective responsibility when it comes to ethnicity or language, these sort of things, if it is not a matter of choice, of course. I do believe in collective responsibility when it comes to vast majority of Russians and to Russian nationals. Not each and single of them, but I really see that in dozens of years' time, maybe before, maybe earlier, there will be plenty of people on the territory of contemporary Russia who will say, we didn't do anything. We didn't take part in that nightmare. We didn't fight, we didn't vote, we didn't even work at the armaments factories. No, we are not complicit, we are not responsible. I don't believe that. Because responsibility counts not only for things people do, but also for things people don't do. If you didn't do anything to stop the bloodbath, well, you were afraid, maybe? Afraid of what? To be killed, probably, in your house by a missile. No. You were afraid that you will be dispersed by Russian riot police. It is unpleasant, but it is incomparable. If you didn't do anything, and you paid taxes, you funded this war, do you want it or not? And it was waged on your behalf because you are citizens of this country. Then I'm afraid it is too difficult to say I didn't do anything. But when it comes to ethnicity or language, here we start to have vicious stereotypes. I believe, again, for citizens, it is still individual responsibility. I don't believe in collective responsibility, which arises from stereotypes. So my attitude in general didn't change. But of course, as a soldier, I understand what dehumanization means. And I wouldn't stop my guys at the zero line to use dehumanizing language towards the adversaries for very plain, practical, and simple reasons, not only because they have to be effective, but also because it is one of the preconditions for survival. I wanted them to survive. Otherwise, it is still actual. And if we'll escape the traps of dehumanization, of revenge, that will make our transfer back to peaceful life easier and more foreseeable. I actually was again surprised when I was released to see that despite being at war for 3 years, Ukraine preserved a lot of not only human rights but civil liberties, which are usually curtailed in the wartime. You know, assemblies, gatherings, very diverse opinions in media, public discussions, it's all present. I actually was afraid that it will be worse. When I arrived back to Ukraine and I was on rehabilitation and I started to have access to Ukrainian media with all those terrible headlines about corruption in Ukraine, you know, about bad politicians, about unfortunate or non-talented military commanders, about treason. And I should say, my parents told me, what a terrible bunch of headlines, isn't it? And I said, wonderful. Because before I spent 2 years and something in the environment, okay, I didn't have access to TV at the beginning, but then there was TV and then there were newspapers. And it was a world where we are moving forward, everything is fine, our country is the best, our leader is the wisest. Well, there are some, you know, corrupted people, but they are arrested by our law enforcement. And then you come back home and like, everything is terrible. And like, finally, it's freedom. It's freedom, you can see it. Yeah, so I think we preserved enough to make our transfer back to peaceful and democratic life easier, but the huge one of those million of challenges we will face, how to be open and free a democratic society, being constantly prepared, well, you know, having this kind of neighbor, as long as Russian Federation will exist in its current form. This will be a very difficult task, but I think we'll manage.
Yeah, Eva, I see you, but it's already 8 o'clock and we are totally already run out of the time and everything. I wanted to thank Maksym for his great talk, to underline once again, we need to ensure that Russian war crimes are prosecuted. We need to ensure justice in Ukraine. We need to speak about Crimea. And before we close, I just wanted to return to something a bit personal and to ask you a small last question. In 2007, you wrote in one of the essays, which is published in the book, that love will save us. Given all that what you experienced since then, so would you still say the same today? And what gives you the strength to fight further? What about love?
I think so more than ever, actually. You know, I had some time to, well, for thinking process there. For some time before the full-scale invasion, from time to time, I actually thought that being swallowed by constant stream of events and activities, I didn't have time to take a step aside and to think about fundamental things. What are my fundamentals? What are my priorities? Why am I really sure, confident about stating what I do? Or why different people perceive me differently in my different social interactions? What is the most essential? So I really wanted to have some time not to be disturbed and to think things over. And on the third, probably, day in prison of Luhansk, I suddenly realized that, well, you wanted time and not to be disturbed, you have it. We were not given any texts to read, of course. We didn't have paper. I told you about toilet paper. We didn't have any paper or pen. We were disturbed by interrogations, but otherwise, yeah, you wanted time, you have it. You didn't want it to be in captivity and during war. Well, probably you've got to be more precise in your requests then. And I really started to kind of to think things through. I started with the notions, basic notions of what we experienced. I started with the notions of violence, of fear, pain, and death, and how they intertwined, and how they relate to each other, and how they relate to notions of life, and freedom, and dignity. And what is human in us, what makes us different from other creatures or other beings. So I had this thinking process for 2 years and 4 months, and actually more, because it still continues, it still goes on. But it was very interesting. Of course, it was some sort of homegrown philosophy. But to me, starting from some point, life, freedom, and meaning were intertwined to an extent that I couldn't basically distinguish between themselves. I couldn't separate them one from another when it comes to human world. And of course, love. Yeah, I think it will save us. For one simple reason, love is the enforcement, or not enforcement, like approvement of the being of the other to the biggest possible extent. When you love someone, you want this person or this being to be, to exist. You do whatever possible. And love is acting. It is not emotion. It is deed. You do something to ensure that the other or the others live, exist, and be. And this is what we try to do. I really think that we are protecting life, we're defending life, we're defending freedom. Violence is, I understood that I misunderstood violence before. I thought that violence is about destruction in the first place, about physical destruction when it comes to human beings. About pain, about suffering, about breaking someone. While there, I realized that violence in the first place is about turning another human being into an object, depriving it of its agency. You create an atmosphere where you come around and say to someone, sing, and that person sings. Russian anthem, for instance. Learn it by heart. Sing it now. Sit up. Push up. Fall. Stand up. Bend. Shout. Shut up. Basically, you turn people into toys. And then if that person disobeys, you might break it. Or maybe if just you got bored with it. But it deprives others of humanity by taking away freedom, because you cannot turn a free person into an object. And objects are not living beings. So to me, life and freedom became inseparable when it comes to humans, and love became inseparable from them, as the approvement, as the the biggest possible acknowledgement that the others are the biggest value we've got, the biggest treasure, something to guard, to save, to nourish, to care about. These are the others, and this is about love. So yes, I think it will save us.
Thank you, Maksym.
Hello!